Finally, a new tropical disturbance is looking more likely to become the next tropical storm in the Atlantic this week. At the same time, a tropical storm in the eastern Pacific is expected to bring rain to California. In this video, I'm going to show you what's happening in the tropics and what to expect from these storm systems. But first, feel free to hit that like button, and if you're new here, feel free to hit that subscribe button for more tropical weather updates. So here's the latest tropical weather outlook from the NHC. This is Invest to 92, a disturbance with a 90% chance of tropical cyclone formation. Here's the latest tropical weather outlook. They're saying a broad area of low pressure located about halfway between the Windward Islands and the coast of West Africa is showing signs of organization and is expected to move through a favorable environment for further development. A tropical depression or tropical storm is likely to form by the middle to later part of this week while the system moves west-northwestward at 10 to 15 miles per hour over the central tropical Atlantic. Formation chance through 48 hours has increased to 60%, and in the next 7 days, it's risen to 90% now. If this doesn't just completely crash and disappear like the previous disturbance, if that doesn't happen, this is looking more likely to be the next tropical system in the Atlantic, and the next name on the list is Gabrielle. So here's a look at the current satellite imagery of Invest 92. Notice it is pretty disorganized, but you can definitely see some decent outflow on the north and west side of the tropical system, and the convection is trying to get more organized near the center. That's for sure. So we'll have to see what happens over the next couple days. The intensity guidance from Tropical Tidbits are showing potentially that within the next 36 hours, we could have winds reaching tropical storm strength before it strengthens even further, potentially to a hurricane in the next several days. We'll have to see what happens with that, if it just stays a tropical storm for a while or if it's able to intensify further. Now, the track guidance is taking it off to the northwest across the tropical Atlantic, and as you can see in the tropical weather outlook, it makes a turn to the west, and that's shown on the forecast models. It does make a turn to the west before it starts turning more to the northwest again. But even with that, the forecast models are keeping it away from the Caribbean. So this is not expected to hit the Caribbean. Now, down the road, we'll have to see if it reaches Bermuda. We'll see about that, but nothing for the Caribbean out of this at this point. Here's a look at the GFS model showing over the next 4 days, going all the way into September 19th. On Friday, we have a tropical storm. Now, notice this is showing the mid-level moisture as well as the areas of low pressure, and we can see that, yeah, there is a decent moisture with it now. Off to the west, there is some drier air trying to wrap around the storm system, but it looks like it's able to strengthen and maintain its intensity, and it actually intensifies relatively slowly over the next few days until we get to around September 20th. Then it really takes off. Notice it's 995 millibars, probably a strong tropical storm at this point, getting close to hurricane intensity, and then we could enter rapid intensification around September 21st, next Sunday, going all the way down to a 970 millibar hurricane fairly quickly, and then it intensifies even further down to 951 millibars. It could even be undergoing some baroclinic intensification as it goes into higher latitudes and could start interacting with some upper level troughing, and you could see that happening as we go through September 22nd all the way. By the time we get to September 25th, we could be looking at a very powerful extratropical cyclone out there. Now, it does come close to Bermuda, but the GFS model is keeping it to the east of Bermuda. Then notice what's going on behind it. There's another tropical wave potentially turning into a tropical storm or hurricane behind this storm system that we're looking at. So we'll have to see what happens with that one. That one also is a fish storm. Doesn't really do much out there in the Atlantic. And then going into October 1st, that's pretty much it with our tropical activity on the GFS model. We'll have to see what happens out close to the Central American Gyre and the Western Caribbean and the Gulf. We'll have to see if there's some potential development with that, but the GFS model not showing anything at this time. Now, here's the Euro model for comparison. We're still looking at a tropical storm trying to form, but notice there's a lot of dry air, and it's really not looking very favorable. There's more dry air on the Euro model right here than the GFS model was showing, but it does finally, once it gets past September 22nd, so it could take a little longer on the Euro model, it gets down to a strong tropical storm by that time, and then it really just takes off and undergoes extremely rapid intensification, going from a 980 something, maybe 990 millibar low-end Category 1 hurricane, perhaps, going all the way down to a 950 something millibar storm less than 24 hours later on September 23rd, and then it goes from a 955 millibars, probably a Category 3, all the way down to a 933 millibar storm system, and then it starts weakening after that point as it becomes more of an extratropical storm system, but comes back down to a 930 something millibar storm, and it gets a little bit closer to Bermuda, but still it actually almost makes a direct hit. Now, the storm system is lopsided, but still a very powerful hurricane, and that's what the Euro model is showing, and not much with any tropical waves behind it or anything, but a lot of, just notice a lot of dry air in the tropics, which is, it is pretty unusual to have this level of inactivity happening at the peak of hurricane season. And so the moisture is not really there. We'll have to see if it's able to stay in an area with enough moisture that it's able to strengthen into a more significant tropical system. The wind shear could be a problem. Looking at wind shear going on over the next few days, 18 knots of wind shear, that's actually unfavorable for a developing storm system. So we're looking at potentially just staying a weak tropical storm for a while. Even still 18 knots of wind shear going into September 20th on the Euro model. Then this is where things start to change. As it starts to rapidly intensify, we see a lot of strong winds to the north and the east side of the storm system. That's forming more of an outflow. So it's not destructive wind shear, but it's actually helping the storm system. And then as it really intensifies, as it gets pulled off to the northeast, we're looking at still some very strong outflow, especially on the north and east side of the hurricane. Here's a look at the Euro ensemble, showing where is this storm system expected to go. We actually have an area of low pressure off the North Carolina coast. That's not really expected to become a tropical system. It doesn't really have time, and there's really still an upper level trough back here across the southeastern U.S. that's fueling this storm system, so it's not really a tropical system at all. But here's our tropical wave, Invest 92. You can see that it goes to the west and the northwest through the tropical Atlantic. We're pretty certain on where it's going to go in this general direction through the next several days, really almost all the way out to the next 5 to 6 days. And then after the 7 to 8 day time frame, we're looking at things fanning out a lot, and it could get closer to Bermuda, it could stay further east of Bermuda, it could stay further south. We'll have to see. The further south it goes, probably the more likely it is that it's going to hit Bermuda versus if it just turns before it even gets anywhere close. But then we're looking at possibly impacts on Bermuda around September 23rd to 25th before it really just goes out into the open Atlantic. Even if the wind shear isn't the most favorable and the moisture isn't great either, we do have a couple things working in favor of some more tropical activity. One is the environment should be a little more favorable just because it's the peak of hurricane season, but that doesn't seem to be helping too much. But as we can see, the MJO is going to be a favorable factor. You can see it's very favorable across the Eastern Pacific and the Atlantic, even the US, which we're seeing some severe weather happening in different places. So there's that, but basically we're looking at pretty favorable over the next couple days. Wednesday, September 17th, even going towards the 18th, then it starts getting more unfavorable over the Eastern Pacific, even though we do have a disturbance out there too. Then, as we go into September 18th, which in my previous video I actually said that after September 15th, which is today, things would get more favorable for tropical activity in terms of the MJO, and that's exactly what we're seeing. But I said around September 18th, some of the models were showing that it would get really favorable. Now, it has changed just a little bit. We're actually very favorable from now, even through around Wednesday, September 17th, But even with this, September 18th, we're seeing favorable conditions over the eastern part of the Atlantic in the main development region. So that could be just what our tropical system needs to be able to try and organize into a tropical system, even with some of those unfavorable conditions. We'll see. But this is even September 19th that gets even more favorable, even favorable over Western Africa with those tropical waves. But then, as we go towards the first day of fall, September 22nd, we're looking at very unfavorable conditions returning on the MJO across the Eastern Pacific and the Atlantic. So not looking great for any activity there, but there were some previous runs of the GFS model showing some slightly more favorable conditions across the western part of the Atlantic heading into the very end of September and going into the beginning of October. The current run has taken that away. We'll see what happens. But we also have something working for tropical activity, and that is the extremely warm sea surface temperatures. We have the sea surface temperatures are extremely high across the Atlantic. We're looking at over 30 degrees Celsius, which is 86 degrees Fahrenheit. Looking at those temperatures across a big part of the Atlantic, really upper 80s, close to 90 degrees, going across the parts of the main development region and the Caribbean and the Gulf. Looking at some pretty warm sea surface temperatures there, with temperatures in the upper 80s, even close to 90 degrees. There's some parts of the Caribbean where we're looking at sea surface temperatures over 90 degrees because of the lack of hurricane activity and just a lot of stable conditions and very warm temperatures. We're seeing all that happening. That's warming up the water temperatures even more, which if we're able to see a hurricane or a tropical storm system moving into those water temperatures, things are going to be even more favorable for explosive intensification. If it's able to go over these warm waters and it's able to encounter a lighter wind shear environment. But really, the lack of activity is pretty strange. And the Atlantic has been way less active than pretty much all the forecasts were expecting, like 2013. And interestingly enough, according to Tropical Tidbits, the sea surface temperature pattern, like globally, not just in the Atlantic and the Pacific, and globally, lines up best with 2013, apparently. So that's the top analog for this hurricane season, just based on the sea surface temperatures over the past 30 days. So that's interesting. And 2013 gave us a very inactive Atlantic. Also, some activity in the Pacific, not just north of Hawaii like Hurricane Kiko, and I think there was another hurricane that did that too. But seeing a lot more activity right off the coast of Mexico. So that's another thing that's been happening quite a bit this hurricane season too. So interesting how we're seeing a repeat of that happening. But yeah, speaking of the Eastern Pacific, we do have Tropical Storm Mario, maximum sustained winds of 65 miles an hour, minimum central pressure at 993 millibars, and it's moving northwest at 13 miles per hour. Then we also have another disturbance behind it with a 70% chance of formation off the coast of southwestern Mexico. An elongated trough of low pressure located several hundred miles off the coast of southern Mexico is producing disorganized showers and thunderstorms. Environmental conditions appear conducive for gradual development of this system, and a tropical depression is likely to form during the middle to later part of this week as it moves west-northwestward at 10 to 15 miles per hour over the central East Pacific. Formation chance for 48 hours is medium. It's around 40%. Through the next 7 days is high at 70%. So we're going to get another tropical storm out of that most likely. But Tropical Storm Mario is actually expected to bring rain to California later this week. Here's the current satellite imagery of Mario. You can see that there was actually a lot of convection around it that was pretty intense and, a pretty strong storm system. But now some of that convection is fading down. It's starting to get into cooler water temperatures, which is going to really collapse the convection. Also, possibly drier air and more wind shear. But notice there's a lot of thunderstorm activity around the southern part of Baja California. So that moisture is getting pushed further to the north. Here's the cone for Tropical Storm Mario. it is expected to stay a tropical storm until tomorrow, somewhere around maybe 11 a.m. Tuesday. It's still a tropical storm, but then by Tuesday night, it looks like it's becoming a post-tropical cyclone. Still a tropical storm force winds, but then after that, going to Wednesday, it really, the intensity drops off. But it's not about the wind, it's about the rain. Here's a look at the GFS model taking us through around Tuesday. You could see Tropical Storm Mario lifts off to the north and starts weakening down. But notice that moisture moving towards California. Not even so much like Arizona and the Southwest. They'll get some, but mostly California. And so look what happens by the time we get into Thursday and then going to Friday. You can see the rain over a big portion of California. Even if it's light rain, there's the potential for some showers and thunderstorms, I would imagine. That's pretty cool to see some tropical moisture from a tropical system moving into California. So that's interesting, because it's like, okay, nothing in the Atlantic, but now we're seeing tropical moisture reaching California. And that stays around until Saturday, Friday night into Saturday, before we have some more rain and more moisture moving into the northwestern U.S. And then we could see actually possibly some severe weather around Sunday night, September 21st, going to September 22nd, possibly looking at some stuff happening there. And then there's possibly another trough moving in, bringing even more precipitation, some rain, even some high elevation snow, some of the first snowfall of the fall and winter season, going into September 26th to 28th timeframe. That's going to be nice. And then those storm systems push into the Midwest, so we're going into more of that like fall weather pattern. And then we could see some more snowfall over some of the mountains in southwestern Canada and the northwestern U.S. heading into October 1st. So that's what the GFS has for not just the tropical moisture, but an active weather pattern returning to the U.S. And then here's what we have on the GFS model for the Eastern Pacific tropics. We have a Tropical Storm Mario moving north, bringing rain to California. Then we have our next storm system possibly becomes a hurricane, and then possibly trying to get another storm system near Central America with the Central American Gyre. So it could either be on the Eastern Pacific side or possibly doing something on the Atlantic side. But, seeing how this hurricane season's been going, I'd lean more towards the Eastern Pacific for this one. Then there's this. This is the Global Tropics Hazards Outlook. This was from last week. They'll actually update this tomorrow. We have week 2. This is September 17th to September 23rd, looking at a 40% chance of seeing something out in the main development region, but a 70% chance, or an over 60% chance of tropical activity in the Eastern Pacific near southern Mexico. Then we're looking at a 20% chance of activity from September 24th to September 30th, a 20% chance of tropical activity in the main development region, and also in the Eastern Pacific, but also notice for both week 2 and week 3, there is a 20% chance of seeing something near the Central American Gyre in the Gulf or the Western Caribbean. So that's what we have out there to watch. That's pretty much what's happening in the tropics. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, please be sure to hit that like button if you haven't already. Share the video and make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for more weather updates on the tropics. Thanks for watching. Extreme Weather Zone, out.